Kia ora. Welcome back to part 2, and I'm going to focus on hoping collectively and hoping well. So despair, grief, hopelessness about climate change was pervasive, but many of our participants were buoyed up by the sheer numbers turning out to support the school strike for climate marches across the world, and the passing of the Zero Carbon Act in New Zealand in 2019 was a big deal.
It was really exciting seeing everyone. I would never see that many people going out and being activists, everyone from every single side of politics, and the world was all there because it's something that affects everyone.
I feel less hopeful about whether we're ever going to be able to get 1.5 degrees worth of warming. But I do feel far more heartened by the extent of awareness that comes with the escalating emergency, because it means that far more people who are sort of 10 years younger than myself at school are far more eager to come along to Gen Zero meetings or to come along to public events where people speak about what they feel should be done about climate change.
I guess the best thing that happened was actually being with my fellow volunteers when the Zero Carbon Bill was announced. The bill wasn't just a piece of paper. It literally is a group of young people coming together on a Wednesday night going, let's do something about this, let's turn this around.
But the awareness of obstacles and being cynical about whether governments will make change are important. It's part of what Victoria McGeer calls hoping well. In our study, groups that activists joined provided the conditions for creating collective hope. Collective hope is something that is shared meaningfully but critically by a group. Taking critical account of the obstacles you face as well as dreaming of what's possible are both part of hoping well. There was no neat and tidy demarcation between the cynics and the optimists because many individuals kind of seesawed between hope, despair, anger. Like Leroy described how he'd become a day-to-day cynic but an overall optimist.
I don't think I ever overestimate things. I'm more likely to think something won't work and to try and lower expectations. I think I'm a realist and I don't trust easily, but I do think we're going to be able to solve these massive problems facing society. I volunteered my evenings for 5 years to try and fight these things. You only really do it if you think things can be better. I think long term, we have to believe that things will get better, but in terms of campaign outlooks, I think I'm quite cynical about people and how things will go. I never think things are going to change the world.
So balancing hope and anger was important.
Hope is one emotion, has to be balanced with anger. And I think that anger is mainly pushed by reality. If you look at reality right now, not much change is happening and I'm angered by that or I'm frustrated by that. And so I think that talking about idealism and reality is super important, not just in terms of bringing people in, but dictating how we work. Reality actually puts you out there and helps you actually do the things that you need to do to make this happen.
Another activist who had suffered from burnout was thinking about other ways of doing activism.
I've been really grappling with this concept of acceptance, and it's sort of like the antithesis to action in some ways, sort of like the opposite to activist. But I think I'm moving towards a space where it has to be necessary for me to avoid this exhaustion and burnout feeling. It's like, can I accept that people will hurt each other in this world? And at the same time, accepting that, can I also know that there is a possibility that could be otherwise? And I think I need to try and hold both. Similarly, can I accept that the climate is changing rapidly and the future will not be as we know it, at the same time as knowing that, as humans, we can slow this or reverse it? I feel like this is something that will help me, and maybe that action is the action of just being with it. I don't know. My kind of internal jury is still out on that. It's like I'm trying this out as a theory.
These activists are describing in their words what Victoria McGeer describes as hoping well. They aren't hoping naively. These activists are talking about the emotional work of somehow accepting the reality of climate change while still working on trying to slow it. They're holding both the obstacles to change as well as the hope for change. They're hoping with a critical awareness that their hopes might not be realised. I argue that having people like these activists in your group is useful because we learn how to hope from others. So rather than seeing the questioners and the pessimists as undermining the building of collective hope in an activist group, we can think of them as guides to hoping well that is useful for others in a group to learn from. Activist groups can create the conditions for hoping well, which can foster the development of habits of hope through sharing aspirations and the workload of activism. The challenges of working together. So group dynamics and interpersonal conflict can cut across the unifying effects of a shared vision, acting as a catalyst for people to leave groups, sometimes experiencing burnout as a result of the impact of difficult group dynamics in activist groups. Groups in the study included those that were made up by networks of friends, often that was what inspired people to join, but also people they didn't know. The nature of activism often means, and quoting from a participant, having to work alongside people that you may not like, irrespective of whether they were initially friends or not. Fractious friends is one way to conceive of the relationships within activist groups, which might be difficult, alienating some group members while others stay resolutely involved despite the emotional buffeting of interpersonal conflict. Tertiary student activism and the inherent nature of young people ageing out of groups defined by their youth membership also presented a significant problem for 5 of our 6 groups. These experiences were frustrating and at the same time undermined how a group felt about its long-term sustainability. Small groups meant the workload was shared amongst very few, and for groups without paid employees, this was particularly noticeable. Often the year would begin with people willing to share the workload, but as competing demands came into play, the work landed on individuals who couldn't always deliver. Some left their groups to recover.
I left quite deliberately, which was very difficult. There's lots of reasons. I've been trying to leave for quite a long time. There were some really shitty dynamics in the organisation that I was finding really distressing, and I was having pretty bad anxiety related to that.
Some took time out.
It's an all-consuming 24/7 kind of thing. So yeah, I think breaks are so important, and that's why it's all about a collective kind of responsibility and collective action, because it's too much for one person. There's no way you could handle that responsibility. At least you maintain a sense of accountability by the fact that you're doing this with so many others and they're all in the same situation as you.
Many actively managed what they could do, and others drew on their experiences of burnout to run workshops for their peers on how to identify the signs and act to address it. The emotional toll of working on issues like climate change and colonisation is significant, and my brief overview doesn't do it justice. But we are writing a book about youth-led activism in New Zealand, and we'll cover this in more detail. So to summarise, activist groups can provide the conditions for creating collective hope. Collective hope is something that is shared meaningfully but critically by a group. Those who question a group's vision and tactics can help a group to hope critically. Questioners and critics in a group can feel undermining and disruptive, but staying with and listening to conflicting points of view is part of the process of building collective hope. It is important activists talk about the emotional work of accepting the reality of climate change while still working on trying to slow it. It is important to hope with critical awareness that our hopes might not be realised. This is part of hoping well, ironic as that might sound. We have a blog, so if you want to read more about our project, find out more about the groups involved, our publications and the references used in this presentation. Here's the address. I'll finish with a whakatauki, a Māori proverb, he waka eke noa, which means we are all in this boat, this planet, together. It's imperative we find ways to work together to address climate change. Thank you for listening.